Pentecost came. They were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them.
Now, when he says speak in other tongues, tongues is also translated as another language. All right, so we're addressing the speaking in tongues doctrine. All right, now listen very closely to what he's saying.
Now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven.
Every Yahudi under every nation. So he's talking about Yahudis, Jews, out of every nation. All right? Keep that in mind. So guess what? These Yahudis that's in every nation, guess what language they're speaking? The language and the tongue of these nations. Just like I'm a Hebrew in America, guess what I'm speaking? English. All right, so this was the miracle that all these Yahudis from all these different nations that spoke the native tongue of these nations, they were speaking Hebrew in a tongue that everybody can understand. Watch this.
When they heard this sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment because each one heard their own language being spoken.
You hear that? They heard their own language being spoken.
Utterly amazed, they asked, "Aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? Then how is it that each of us hears them in our native language? Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya near Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism."
Now, that word Judaism, you see this? You see, it's in parentheses. So that was added. Okay.
Cretans and Arabs, we hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own tongues.
You hear that? So he's saying all these Yahudis from all these different nations, Egypt, Pontus, Asia, Persia, Cappadocia, Mesopotamia, Elamites, Parthians, Medes, they were speaking Hebrew, but their original tongue was the native tongue of these nations. It's not hard. They wasn't speaking gibberish, people.
Amazed and perplexed, they asked one another, "What does this mean?" Some, however, made fun of them and said, "They have had too much wine." Then Peter stood up with the 11, raised his voice, and addressed the crowd. "Fellow Jews, and all of you who live in Jerusalem, let me explain this to you. Listen carefully to what I say. These people are not drunk, as you suppose. It's only 9 in the morning. No, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy."
You hear that? So, this was prophesied by the prophet Yisra'EL, that all these, the spirit, right? The Ruach, will be poured out on all flesh. This has nothing to do with speaking gibberish, like acting like a turkey, falling out on the ground, acting possessed, all right? That's exactly what this man. Let's go get that. Let's go look at what Joel said.
And that there is no other. Never again will my people be shamed. And afterward, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days. I will.
Okay, so there it is. That was the day of the Feast of Weeks, what they would call it, the Pentecost. All right, so there it is. That was being fulfilled in Acts 2. They were not speaking. They were not talking about speaking gibberish, turkey talk. Speaking in tongues. All right, these were languages from other nations. All right, this is what has to stop. False doctrine has to stop and has to be addressed. All right, man, that's been my time. I'm out, man.